B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Monday, December 9th, 2019. It's a busy week in Washington with impeachment hearings underway. An inspector general's report dropped today, but it's got a huge asterisk on it, as there is another report expected shortly that could contradict it. I know it's hard to keep all this straight, and that is my job. And I do my level best every day to keep it all straight and deliver it to you with news and commentary. And today I want to dedicate this podcast to the memory of Debbie Cantwell, my brother's sister-in-law, who died of pancreatic cancer in York, Maine last week. We're going to miss you, Debbie. So to the news today, the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, completed his investigation into the origins of the Trump-Russia investigation that morphed into the Mueller investigation that leaves us kind of where we are today. Now, this is a massive 400-page report. I've only been able to scan some news accounts. I'll try to dive into the report tonight and see if I can find additional information that I think you deserve to know about. The bottom line here is that Horowitz said that there is no documentary or testimonial evidence of political bias behind the official actions by top FBI officials like James Comey and Andy McCabe, and their underlings, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and others. But Mr. Horowitz determined that there is substantial dysfunction, carelessness, and at least 17 errors in the FBI's applications for FISA court warrants aimed at wiretapping Carter Page. The biggest omission was that Carter Page had served as a CIA informant for a number of years before he came on FBI radar related to Trump and Russia. And it appears that they never included that information, which I think an objective person would say is important and exculpatory, because it shows that Carter Page's alliances, his allegiances, at least in the past, had lain with the United States. So that is a stunning error. And it's being blamed on a guy who is falsely described as a low-level FBI attorney. His name is Kevin Kleinsmith. And I want to note that John Kiriakou, our friend, the CIA whistleblower, he had a post up last week noting that Kleinsmith was not a low-level attorney. He was an attorney. He ended up on part of the Mueller investigation. And it was his signature, apparently, showing that documents submitted had been altered, leaving out the relationship of Carter Page to the CIA in renewal applications for the FISA warrants. Also, the issue has been long argued that the role of Christopher Steele, the infamous dossier, and how that was used as some of the initial evidence to say, we got a problem here, we better start an investigation, and let's call it Crossfire Hurricane. And so they did, and that was in July of 2016. And Horowitz said that the FBI had sufficient evidence to lawfully open the investigation, and its use of informants to approach campaign aides followed procedures. Now, as you know, I find all of this worthy of great skepticism, because in the news accounts that I've seen so far, there is no mention of Stephen Halper, the murky American professor who interacted with Carter Page and George Papadopoulos in London. He was tied to Christopher Steele, to, Dearlove, who was the head of MI6 and the former boss of Christopher Steele. And so I consider this still to be somewhat incomplete. And I will accept that an inspector general who's supposed to be completely neutral, but who was tasked with this assignment by Jefferson Beauregard Sessions when he was the Attorney General, I think it does have some weight. At the same time, the asterisk that I mentioned comes from John Durham. Now, he is this special investigator for Bill Barr, the Attorney General. Durham is a U.S. attorney in Connecticut. He has done highly political investigations of this sort in the past, and so I don't have any confidence in him. I believe he's running a political investigation. But Durham issued a statement today, said that while we have deep respect for the Inspector General, we don't agree with his findings on predication of the investigation and how the FBI case was opened. Perhaps that has something to do with Stephen Halpert. Perhaps it's just a political bluster. At this point, we don't know. But we have to wait and see what Durham reports, and there is a likely prospect that Rudy Giuliani, fresh back from Ukraine, is going to report to a friendly Senate committee, probably Judiciary under Lindsey Graham, his quote-unquote findings related to the claims of 2016 meddling in the election by Ukraine. So we're going to have to let this play out. I'm sure that both sides are going to be claiming victory with the Inspector General's account. The Republicans will focus on the 17 errors. The Democrats will focus on the, quote, we did not find documentary or testimonial evidence that political bias or improper motivation influenced the FBI's decision to seek FISA authority on Carter Page. And the IG's flatly saying the FBI's leadership, he found no documentary or testimonial evidence of political bias there. So we're going to see really more of a stalemate here. I don't think this moves the needle in any particular direction. The report includes a footnote that says that investigators' conversations with Christopher Steele, the former British spy who wrote the dossier, said that he pushed back on being called biased. He said, if anything, he was favorably disposed toward the Trump family before he began his research because he had visited a Trump family member at Trump Tower and been friendly with the family member for some years. And that family member has been identified as Ivanka Trump. And so just like we saw last week, that one of the spin doctors who's working in the basement of the White House to try to spin things up favorably to Trump over impeachment is on leave from Doug Band's Teneo. Doug Band was the top dog at the Clinton Foundation. Teneo's his lobby shop that he used to gather cash for Bill Clinton. And so when you see how the same characters populate both sides, you're just left spinning, and that's kind of where I am today. So I am, inclined to accept the Inspector General's conclusions here. And my bottom line is that I'd like to see the abolition of the FISA court. It has no place in our system of government, a secret court where we know that those who have appeared before the court have repeatedly lied to the judges about the nature of the investigations they were running and the urgency of the court-ordered wiretaps and other surveillance tools. But there will be no real reform of FISA. There'll be no real reform of the FBI. Neither party wants to do that because they are convenient punching bags and, targets of finger-pointing. And Horowitz is also going to appear before the Senate Judiciary Committee to discuss his findings on Wednesday. So it's going to be a busy week of hearings and testimony. The FBI also used informants to record conversations with Trump associates including one person described in the report as a high-level Trump campaign official who was not a subject of the investigation. Maybe that's Steve Bannon? Can't be Manafort. Can't be Gates. So we're left guessing about that. And it does say here, this is modestly encouraging, Horowitz has launched a broader audit of FISA work to study how systemic those problems may be for FISA applications. But he didn't conclude that the Bureau's applications to monitor Page should have been rejected. So this is really such a dark time. If you believe in our system of government, you believe that people of goodwill should embrace constitutional precepts and work to enforce them equally on all parties. But the politicization of this entire process and the games that are being played by both sides leave us really in a desperate moment where we cannot have confidence that this system will survive the Trump era, whether it's 4 years or 8 years. And it truly saddens me, it does. So over the weekend, the House Judiciary Committee completed a 52-page report and sent it to itself. And then it opened that report in hearings this morning, and I only have coverage of the morning session so far. The report basically offers the legal case for impeachment, and it is based largely on the 1974 document, which was created by the Judiciary Committee during the process leading up to the attempt to impeach Richard Nixon. Both the old report and the new one trace the origins of impeachment from England. Both reports primarily focus on how to define treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. But the current document is clearly meant to be a roadmap for Democrats, tracking closely with the allegations they've already made about Trump's conduct. It lays out several offenses that could form the basis for articles of impeachment, including bribery. And the Democrats believe that there is a clear case of bribery in the Ukraine episode, and I wish that were the case. It is not that clear-cut. And the claims are undermined because it was, you can now say, well, all it was is a threat to hold up the aid because it was temporary, and in mid-September, most of that money was delivered to Ukraine. And so there are all these different ways that the Republicans can try to rationalize Trump's behavior, try to contextualize it. They're now claiming that because of the new jobs report on Friday and that unemployment is at an all-time low, that impeachment is off the table. Huh? That is such bullshit. But that's what they're pumping out of D.C. these days. So I have the Washington Post summary of the 4 big takeaways from this morning's session. Democrats are using Giuliani to push back on timeline critiques. Now, they're being criticized for rushing this impeachment through. I've been one of the critics there. One of the reasons they're doing it, they say, is that, well, Trump's trying to rig another election and we can't let another day go by. But the other issue here, too, is will they be able to convince Americans and even persuade a single elected Republican to impeach and remove Trump without testimony from Giuliani and from some of the other knuckleheads, Pompeo, Mick Mulvaney, White House counsel, former guy Don McGahn? And so the Democrats are saying that, well, we've got to rush this because the next election is already potentially compromised. And the Republicans are saying, well, wait, you haven't heard all the witnesses. And, of course, their lie is that they are supporting the president who obstructs the appearance of these witnesses. And so it is a tough call because the Democrats don't want to wait months for the courts to come to some understanding, resolution on this issue. And I feel the pain of that. Number 2, Democrats are arguing the case against Trump is unassailable even without those top witnesses. As you can tell, I'm not convinced of that. Republicans are relying less on substance than process. Well, that's been the case since the what is purported to be the call transcript, I still don't think it's complete, was released. And here's a comment. When the Republican counsel, Stephen Castor, did talk about substance, he didn't have a lot to work with. He argued the July 25th call, in which Trump asked for a favor from Ukraine's president, is the only thing Democrats have pinned on Trump. To impeach a president 63 million people voted for over 8 lines in a call transcript is baloney. And the counter to that from Democratic lawyer Daniel Goldman, that reducing this case to 8 lines sorely ignores the vast amount of evidence that we collected of a months-long scheme directed by the president. And truly, his direct involvement and the order of, telling Zelensky to talk to Rudy, those show, I think, the corrupt back channel that was controlled by Trump himself. And this is really unusual. Described as the most bizarre line of attack against the Democrats, Attorney Castor argued that the Trump administration wasn't with it enough to corrupt foreign policy. Lindsey Graham kind of has suggested that. Quote, they'll try to convince you that the Trump administration, the same administration Democrats regularly accuse of being incompetent, orchestrated an international conspiracy at the highest level. So they're even willing to invoke incompetence if it will get them where they want to go. So the other is a trivial matter about all the interruptions posed by Republicans. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your generous subscriptions. Generous people like Faith Peoples, who has been so kind to me with her multiple subscriptions. Carl Howard, the quickest click in the Midwest, who is always the first, I think, to listen to my podcast every day. Thank you, Carl. Susan Gavet here in the Bay Area, and Clifford Johnson. They all chip in $5 to $20 a month. You can do it too. If you are financially able, I ask you to do so. This is the season, right? So come on over to peterbcollins.com. Click on menu, click on Become a Subscriber. You'll hit the sign-up page, and in seconds you can choose the level of support that's comfortable for you. For bonus books, I still have copies of 2100 Dystopian Utopia. Just heard from Vanessa Keith, the author, over the weekend. She's going to be speaking at a UN meeting in January. We'll tip you off when those details fall into place. And the other bonus book, I have one final copy of Trump on the Couch. And it appears nobody's too excited about that anymore because we all know that he doesn't have all of his marbles. I'm often a critic of the Washington Post, and I believe they deserve the criticism I offer. But today I commend them for a blockbuster, lengthy report, it's almost book length, about how we have been lied to about the 18-year war in Afghanistan by every administration. And this is based on a painstaking review of documents and interviews that were prepared by the Inspector General for Afghanistan in putting together a report hoping that this could never happen again. And as I've noted, Americans yawn about the war in Afghanistan. I refer to it as the whatever war. Obama surged 2 different times additional troops into Afghanistan, and America yawned. Then he pulled them out. For the most part, what do we have, 14,000 soldiers there today? And all through this, senior U.S. officials failed to tell the truth about the war in Afghanistan. The documents include more than 2,000 pages of previously unpublished notes from interviews with top officials, including the military leaders. The U.S. government, just like they did in the torture report, and I hope you've seen the new movie called The Report. It's very well done. Anyway, they tried to shield the identities and conceal nearly all of their remarks, but the Washington Post won release of the documents under the Freedom of Information Act after a 3-year legal battle. Here's a quote from Doug Lute, 3-star Army general, who served as the Afghan war czar during both the Bush and Obama administrations. We were devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. We didn't know what we were doing. What are we trying to do here, he asked. We didn't have the foggiest notion of what we were undertaking. Lute continued, if the American people knew the magnitude of this dysfunction, 2,400 lives lost, and over $1 trillion, who will say this war is in vain? He asked. The interviews also highlight the U.S. government's botched attempts to curtail runaway corruption, build a competent Afghan army and police force, put a dent in the opium trade. And here's a quote from Jeffrey Eggers, retired Navy SEAL, White House staffer for Bush and Obama. What do we get for this $1 trillion effort? Was it worth $1 trillion? Several of those interviewed described explicit and sustained efforts by the U.S. to deliberately mislead the public. And they did it in Vietnam. They did it in Iraq. They did it in Afghanistan. And what shocks me is not the continued lies by our government, it's the gullibility of the American people. And to see how so many people on the left who opposed Bush's wars acquiesced to Obama's surge in Afghanistan, the expanded use of drones, takedown of Gaddafi, involvement in Syria, involvement in Yemen. We've been lied to about all this shit. And yet, you mention Russia, and a Rachel Maddow viewer just goes into an altered state, supporting militarism and all kinds of crazy stuff. As a group, as a mass, America has lost its collective mind. And it's not limited to the yahoos on the right who go to Trump rallies and just agree with all that stuff he says. We've got a serious problem on the left in this country, too. Is Roe versus Wade fading? I am shocked to learn that today the Supreme Court announced that it will not review a Kentucky law that requires doctors who perform abortions to give a detailed description of the fetus's development while the woman is shown an ultrasound image, even if she objects. Without comment, with no noted dissent from any of the liberal members, the court said it will not take up a challenge to the law filed by doctors at Kentucky's only remaining abortion clinic. This is stunning. We know that ultrasound is a pretextual right to life impediment to abortion. It typically requires a woman who's pregnant to make 2 visits to the clinic, not 1. And it is completely unnecessary. There is no medical value to an ultrasound. And I'm sure all of these arguments were made to the court. Here's a quote from the brief from the doctors. While the patient is half naked on the exam table with her feet in stirrups, usually with an ultrasound probe inside her vagina, the physician has to keep talking to her, showing her images and describing them, even as she tries to close her eyes and cover her ears. And in some states, there are now 13 states that require ultrasound. The doctor is required to play the audio to the pregnant woman. Wow. I feel like I don't know my country anymore. In dissenting at the appeals court level, and the appeals court ruling essentially was left standing by the Supreme Court's decision not to take up the case, Judge Bernice Bowie Donald said, the state has co-opted physicians' examining tables, their probing instruments, and their voices in order to espouse a political message without regard to the health of the patient or the judgment of the physician. Meanwhile, Ronald Lauder, he and his brother, I believe, are the heirs to the Estee Lauder cosmetics fortune. And just by way of some disclosure, my brother spent about 10 years working for Ronald Lauder. Lauder is a prominent Jewish American who is a longtime Republican donor and an outsized supporter of the State of Israel. He's president of the World Jewish Congress. He has announced a $25 million commitment to start a new organization devoted to rooting out what he calls the growing tide of anti-Semitism in American politics. And get this, he said it knows no political party. I'm going after the right as well as the left. He said if it's a city councilman, a senator, a presidential candidate who utters an anti-Semitic comment, we'll know about it. Except, of course, if it's Donald Trump, a good friend of Ronald Lauder. He said that the 2019 State of the Union address settled the matter for him when Trump declared we must never ignore the vile poison of anti-Semitism or those who spread its venomous creed. That was enough for Ron Lauder. Quote, I don't believe there's an anti-Semitic bone in his body. He set the record straight, as far as I'm concerned, in front of the whole nation. Well, Saturday night, in front of the Israeli-American Council, in Hollywood, Florida, in a 45-minute speech, Trump was pandering to a Jewish audience using what is described as dipping into a deep well of anti-Semitic tropes. And it is stunning what he said. And it's also stunning how he is not considered anti-Semitic when he utters anti-Semitic comments because he's done so much for the state of Israel. And this is where they conflate treatment of Jews with the state of Israel. And Trump gets to have it both ways, but myself, a critic of the government of the state of Israel, its apartheid policies, and I'm a supporter of boycott, divestment, and sanction, but I'm not allowed to do that. So here's what Trump said. We have to get them to love Israel more. He's referring to that only 23% of Jewish voters supported him in 2016. We have to get them to love Israel more because we have people that are Jewish people that are great people. They don't love Israel enough. Then he turned to Jewish voters' wealth. A lot of you are in the real estate business because I know you very well. You're brutal killers. Not nice people at all. But you have to vote for me. You have no choice. You're not going to vote for Pocahontas, I can tell you that. You're not going to vote for the wealth tax. Yeah, let's take 100% of your wealth away. Then he went on. Some of you don't like me. Some of you I don't like at all, actually. And you're going to be my biggest supporters because you're going to be out of business in about 15 minutes if they get it. So I don't have to spend a lot of time on that. So he was not only anti-Semitic, condescending, and deeply offensive. He was insulting his audience. So the American Jewish Committee wrote, Dear POTUS, much as we appreciate your unwavering support for Israel, surely there must be a better way to appeal to Jewish American voters, as you just did in Florida, than by money references that feed age-old and ugly stereotypes. Let's stay off that mine-infested road. But then they trot out, this is the Washington Post, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, who is a corrupt individual who invokes anti-Semitism at the drop of a pin. And he attended the speech. He praised it, one of the most pro-Israel speeches ever delivered by an American president. Now, when Ilhan Omar has suggested that money influences support for Israel, she is denounced and told to go home. The hypocritical double standard, the rationalization of Trump's hateful and ugly speech is just another indicator of how far we have fallen. But Trump has no problem defending the bloody leaders of Saudi Arabia after one of their Air Force lieutenants, Mohammed al-Shamrani, shot and killed 3 people at the Pensacola Naval Air Station last week. And this is a complicated case. The lieutenant filed a grievance last April because one of his teachers in the flight training school made a joke about his mustache and called it a porn stash. And the Saudi trainee wrote up a complaint helped by some Americans. The teacher was apparently disciplined, and they say the case was closed. But this week, al-Shamrani hosted a dinner party where he played videos of mass violent attacks. Then he apparently posted a comment, we believe, on Twitter. I haven't actually seen the tweet, where he attacked the U.S. for its support of Israel. And so far, Trump is taking the Saudi line. He's an apologist for the royal family. He passed along words from a condolence call that came from King Salman on Friday. And David Sanger, top dog at the New York Times, says what was missing was any assurance that the Saudis would aid in the investigation, help identify the suspect's motives, or answer the many questions about the vetting process for somebody who has been in a training program there for several years. And so, once again, if this had been a brown person from Mexico or Central or South America, if this had been a Muslim, and maybe he is Muslim, he's Saudi, but that is trumped by his nationality. And I want to commend the editors, my colleagues at whowhatwhy.org, and I recommend their piece, Saudi Military Base Shooter and the Unexplained 9/11 Connection. And they talk a little bit about this event, how some of the other Saudi trainees videotaped it. It's not clear. They say they just happened to be there and started, recording on their phones. But that is a little suspicious, isn't it? And Who, What, Why ties this to the 9/11 hijackers and the Saudi family that was living in Sarasota, Florida, just before those attacks. It's a good piece, and I have linked to it in the show file for today's podcast for you to check out at your convenience. Amazon is pushing back big time over that JEDI contract, the cloud computing deal with the Pentagon. And they specifically accuse Trump of inappropriately intervening in this $10 billion 10-year contract in order to penalize Jeff Bezos, Amazon, and his other business, the Washington Post. And specifically, Amazon alleges that late in the process, the terms were changed so that Amazon could not use its classified facilities that they have under a CIA contract. They had to create entirely new facilities. That caused their bid price to go up, and that allowed the Microsoft offer to appear more competitive. And flatly, Amazon argues that the motivation for Trump's animus toward Bezos is his ownership of the Washington Post. There hasn't been much coverage of the ongoing protests in France. But over the weekend, the New York Times broke its silence and reported that the nationwide strike that broke out last week over President Macron's plans to modify the pension system led to hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of Paris and across France in protests over the weekend. And it is interesting that the American media, they have assets in France. They can easily cover that, but they don't for the most part. And Ian Berman, our listener and subscriber from New York, pointed that out today in a Facebook post. And there was big turnout for protests, about 800,000 people estimated in the streets of Hong Kong over the weekend. Very little violence this time, and this appears to be kind of the afterglow of the recent local elections that allowed people to vote for pro-democracy. And this is another message to Beijing. We will watch how they respond. We have a new problem at the southern border. Trump created this whole illusion that people from Guatemala who want to claim asylum at the U.S. border have to first go to El Salvador and vice versa. But now there are Mexican citizens who want to claim asylum in the United States because of the increased level of violence in Mexico. And they don't have to go to a third country before they present themselves at the U.S. border. And last month, 17,000 Mexicans that's actually October, were caught crossing between ports of entry, a 34% increase since July. Caitlin Johnstone has another great piece at Consortium News today, updating us on the weekend resignation in protest of a reporter for Newsweek whose name is Tariq Haddad, accusing his editors of censoring his coverage of the leak from the OPCW investigator that undermines the validity of claims that chemical weapons were used in Douma, Syria last year. He wrote on Twitter, Haddad did, "I have collected evidence of how they suppressed the story," referring to his editors, in addition to evidence from another case where info inconvenient to the U.S. government was removed, though it was factually correct. I plan on publishing these details in full shortly. But then he says I was threatened with legal action. So he's now looking for a whistleblower attorney, and he said that he's going to publish as much as he can without legal retaliation. I think it's a worthwhile piece. Check it out. There's a link in the show file at peterbcollins.com. And finally today, I want to recommend a 3-minute video put together by Ryan Grimm at The Intercept, arguing that the Bernie blackout, which is real, and the video depicts the shortcomings in coverage, the outright lies, where they'll publish on CNN or in a newspaper the results of the latest poll and ignore that Bernie Sanders is in second or third place. But Grimm suspects that the blackout may help Bernie Sanders win. It's counterintuitive. I hope you'll check it out. Follow the link in the show file at peterbcollins.com. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it all over the place. You'll find it on YouTube. And I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails